Good afternoon and welcome to a Euractiv debate supported by Teachers for Europe. I'm Mariam Zaidi and I will be moderating today's debate on fostering democracy in the EU and the role of education. A big thank you, of course, to everyone who is joining us online, and a reminder, if you have a question or a comment, don't forget to send it into our chat page along with the name of the panelist it's directed at, and we're going to pick out some of your questions for later on in the programme, so get involved starting now. Now, since the 1990s, and especially over the last 2 decades, there's been an exponential rise in populism and euroscepticism across the bloc. A very recent example, France's presidential and their parliamentary elections, which have led to big gains for both the hard right and left. But the paradox is that just as euroscepticism continues its trajectory, so too does support for the European project. In the pandemic and on Ukraine, the EU has played a more assertive role, something I'm sure we've all noticed, and something that has resonated with the public, according to European Barometer polls. Now, an EU-funded project wants education to be the vehicle for creating a better democratic learning environment that inspires a European identity. Now, as we know, education is more than just information. It gives us the tools to help us see the world, to form fact and opinion. It helps shape our ideals and the life that we want to live. But is this idea, this proposal, a lofty ambition? Is it really what the bloc needs? And most importantly, do the public even want it? Well, let's ask the experts. Okay, well, before we do hear from our panelists, let's go straight to Teachers for Europe and find out more about what they're advocating for. Joining us now is Dr. Fateni Azderaki. She's Associate Professor and Jean Monnet Chair on EU Politics in Training, Education, Research and Innovation at the University of Piraeus in Greece. Dr. Fateni is also the Academic Coordinator of the programme Teachers for Europe. Please do take the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your nice introduction. What we tried to make with this project, which is an Erasmus KA3 project, which means it will probably lead to policy reforms. It's up to the European Parliament, of course, and the Council. We tried to discuss with teachers and students and put at the epicenter the Europe of values, the Europe of democracy, through a citizens' agora. So we upscaled a good practice that was introduced in Greece during the difficult times of crisis in 2011 by the European Commission in Greece, the Teachers for Europe project, and we upscale it by introducing in 5 different countries, in Malta, in Cyprus, in Romania, in Germany, and Greece, of course, and by creating networks of teachers and by creating an international network led by Learn to Change. So we are 9 partners in this venture, in this project. What we try to do is to upscale the knowledge of teachers on EU issues by providing them with new training opportunities. So we organize several training activities in Greece, Germany, Romania, Cyprus, and Malta. A winter school in Cyprus, a summer school in Malta. We we offer them webinars, and we tried to teach them how to develop simulation exercises. So they simulated the European Parliament and in general the decision-making procedure of the European Union. We also organized the Teachers for Europe Academy, as we call it, and we offered a massive online course under several titles: the European Union and its institutions, EU democracy and citizenship, global citizenship education, and EU and digital competences. We developed material. We put a lot of effort, actually, in order to develop new and innovative material in order to approach this very difficult issue of how to teach European values in the youngsters. We also organized many conferences, and we issued publications like policy briefs and conference proceedings. And right now we're collecting the good practices that the teachers are implementing in their school. We are talking about 1,300 teachers in these 5 countries, and they have implemented relevant projects within their school. Last but not least is our message to Europe. We are collecting messages from the youngsters towards mainly to the Parliament, because the MEPs are those people that are more open to hear the messages that the youngsters are keen to send to them about Europe. And at the end of the day, we're trying to follow a bottom-up approach in order to develop active and democratic citizens for the future of Europe, because yes, we can do it through education. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Astoraki from Teachers for Europe. Okay, well, you heard about their initiative then, and just to go over what we heard from Dr. Astoraki, she was talking about training of teachers, the courses that they could go on, webinars, simulation exercises of the executive and of the European Parliament's decision-making, and providing teachers with new material. Okay, well, let's see what our panelists do think of that then. Well, joining me for this debate are Romanian Socialist MEP Victor Negrescu. He's co-chair of the Cult Committee at the European Parliament. We also have Stefan Zotti. He's team leader of strategy and investments at the European Commission's DG EAC, which stands for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. We also have Tatiana Babraskin. She's a member of the Workers' Group, Group 2 at the European Economic and Social Committee. We also have Pascal Montpellier. She's CEO at Learn to Change, Change to Learn. And then we also have Jan Ekhorn. He's senior lecturer in social policy at the University of Edinburgh. Well, welcome to you all. And no doubt you were hearing closely to what Teachers for Europe had to say. But to understand a little bit more about each panelist, we'll now give them a few minutes to introduce themselves. So I'll go in order of introduction. And if we could have our MEP, Victor Negrescu, to go first, please do take the floor.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for this important topic that we are debating today, citizenship education, and the need, of course, to raise the visibility on this important topic, but also in the same time convince the European Union and also member states that we need to act together in this direction and improve how we are teaching kids, but also how we are helping teachers provide this type of education, develop specific skills, specific methods, while in the same time addressing the challenges related again to this type of education. And as a member of the European Parliament, the Vice Chair of the Culture and Education Committee in the European Parliament, I often address this issue. And actually, I was the initiator of a couple of very important amendments related to educational policies, in which we refer to the need for the European Union to take a leading position when it comes to dealing with citizenship education, the need to coordinate better, and even, why not, develop a competence framework related to that. In the same time, we believe a more extensive initiative in the field should be promoted by the European Union with specific financial allocations for that. And of course, in the same time, we believe that we can even develop, let's say, resources, common resources that should be made available for teachers across Europe. Because if we look at statistics, only 50%, so 1 in 2 children in Europe, are learning about European history. And when we refer precisely again to institutions, to policies, and to all those details that are important at European level, we acknowledge the fact that EU citizens are not fully aware of what is happening at European level and why we are together in this European Union, how things are functioning, and how they can influence things, hopefully in a positive way. So in the European Parliament, we had approved at the beginning of the year a specific resolution coming up with very concrete recommendation in this regard on how we want this issue to be addressed. In the same time, as a member in the Conference for the Future of Europe, we are speaking in the conclusions about the possibility of having European competencies in the field of citizenship education in order to increase the impact, increase the efficiency of our action in the field, and also improve how we are working with relevant stakeholders like Teachers EU and other platforms that are willing to work on this important file. So the European Parliament is a big promoter of this important topic, and we really need to discuss how we can do that in a very effective way, involve everyone. And of course, when we refer to citizenship education, we refer not only to education in school, we also refer to lifelong learning mechanism, because it's important to address this issue of learning about the EU across group ages and of course in different environments, both for people that have the opportunity to get access to education, but also for those that come from disadvantaged areas. And we need, of course, to use digital tools and a lot of new methods that are there, but that we are not using yet fruitfully across Europe.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the biggest takeaway of what you said there was that only 1 in 2 kids learns about the European Union at school. And you also brought up the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is something that we will also discuss a little bit later on. But now let's go over to Stefan Zotti from the European Commission. Please take the floor for a few minutes, please.
Thanks, Miriam, and thanks for the invitation. You introduced me as a team leader here in our strategy unit. I'm inter alia also responsible for the Chamonix program, and therefore I was very happy to hear from Fontaine, who is actually a Chamonix chair, what's going on in her Chamonix project, because we very much believe that teachers play a crucial role. But let me start maybe from a different angle. I mean, we all agree and we are fully in line with what Mr. Negrescu just said, and the Commission listened very carefully also to the report of your colleague Luis Deves on citizenship education. We need active citizens. We need to promote civic competences. But active citizenship, I think this is also what we can agree about. It's more than just being informed. It has to do with a particular attitude, to the feeling of responsibility for my village, my region, my country, my union. Yeah, and this important attitude is something which can be addressed and needs to be addressed also in the field of education. Therefore, it was very important for the European Commission to widen the focus of the Chamonix program in the new period, which was traditionally a program for the higher education sector, and now to open it also for, as we call it, other fields of education and training. So not only to schools, but as Mr. Negrescu said, to the whole of vocational education, lifelong learning, adult education, etc. And here, a key element of this new Chamonix for other fields of education is actually teacher training. And we are just about to finalize the second call with very, very interesting and very promising projects, which are absolutely in line with what Professor Fontaine explained earlier, to help and empower teachers to actively and actually deal in a different way with European matters, to touch upon issues as values. As I said, it's not only about information, it's about the training of particular attitudes and the particular understanding of the European Union. And completely in line with the European Parliament, I think many things are ongoing, with the Chamonix for schools as the last element in a longer scale of different activities. And we are very confident that this can very well contribute to a better teaching and learning about the European Union, about European values in schools, in lifelong learning, in adult education.
Okay, thank you very much. And one question I'll definitely maybe perhaps put to you in a different way is what you talked about there about active citizenship. And I don't know if you can train European citizens to be active, but let's wait and see. Over now to Tatiana Barbaroskin, member of the Workers' Group at the European Economic and Social Committee. Please do go ahead and take the floor, please.
Thank you, Miriam, and also thank you for inviting to these debates. And you know, this topic is very close to my heart. And apart what you from what you introduced about myself, I'm Lithuanian, and I'm also having educational background, so I understand fully teachers and teachers who are now facing the problem of some multiple problems. And it's a quite a coincidence that Viktor Negrescu, who is here during the Romanian presidency, requested from our committee an opinion. Do you hear me well?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Sorry, do you hear me well? Yes, okay. Oh,
yes,
sorry, because I suddenly have seen all the faces, so I requested the opinion on the education about the European Union. Victor, you remember this? And I was the rapporteur, and already in that opinion, in 2019, we said that education about the European Union and EU literacy should be regarded as key skills and competences with common objectives in terms of minimum knowledge about the European Union. And learning should be done transversally as integral part of multiple subjects, for instance, such as history, geography, and economics, and starting at very early age. So education about the EU should take place in formal settings of at school, but of course also be part of non-formal extracurricular activity, and also in more informal contexts such as associations, youth movements, various civil society organizations working now in different projects, within different projects encouraging active citizen participation. Schools should not be so closed and conservative. They should open their doors to young people, to those EU believers, and teachers shouldn't take the sole responsibility of the young people they are educating. I think that they have to trust also organized civil society. And also the media literacy is very important, because the media is essential component of our contemporary societies, and media education is becoming a major educational issue. How to recognize mis and disinformation about the European Union, for instance. And this is something which brings threat. We see how the war in Ukraine also increased this disinformation, let's say, flood, and the European project itself is under threat also because of fake news spread about the European Union, or even sometimes various member states, trying to split the member states and to kind of ruin the unity they have. So all this weakening, of course, the foundation of the European Union. So I'm a strong believer that we have to strengthen the education about the European Union. And again, thanks again for Victor then being in the government Romanian government to ask for this opinion, because I think it's still a reference for many educators, and then they still take some kind of inspiration from it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the most important word for me then, what you said, was responsibility, and who is really responsible for promoting and imbuing EU values in people and citizens. Okay, well, over now to Pascal Montbard-Galliard, CEO at Learn to Change, Change to Learn. Please do take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mariam. First of all, I would like to say, so I'm French, but most of my work is international. And my perspective today is informed by several experiences. I've been for 12 years a pedagogical advisor for the Council of Europe. I'm a co-author of the reference framework for competencies for democratic culture, and co-founder of Learn to Change, which is a continuation, a community of academics and teachers who are interested in promoting competencies for democracy. And I'm listening to you with a lot of interest. There are a few points that I think maybe I can contribute to. I heard from Victor, for example, that education is more than information, and I think that is an extremely important point. It is in order to be able to talk about values with youth and students, the teachers actually need to be able to reflect on their own. So this aspect of preparedness of teachers to tackle these issues is something that is oftentimes not considered at the level of the importance that it should have. So I'm talking about teacher education that should be at the center of this project of developing European values, and also addressing this euroscepticism that you are pointing out. To develop more trust in our European institutions, it is important that even the teachers be able to perceive themselves as part of the European project. And projects such as Teachers for Europe allows and invites teachers to come into contact with teachers from other countries. And this is so important for themselves to develop a European identity and to understand what are the challenges in other countries, and to have a comparative perspective on these issues. Also, I heard about learning about Europe and European history. Of course, that's important. But what we see is that when teachers start talking about values with students, oftentimes their first realization is that students don't know what values are. So that's a first point to start with, and it was one of the findings that surprised us from our project. I'm used to, I talked about the RFCDC, I'm used to working on the issue of competence, attitude, skills, and knowledge for democracy, and teachers are more used to that language. When we're talking about European values, we're really tackling the issue also of identities. And in order to be able to develop a pedagogy that is fit for that kind of aim, we have to go much beyond learning about. It is about learning for and through democratic behaviors. The actions that we do every day in school is part of the curriculum. Whether we want it or not, if schools are authoritarian environments, the learning ecology that is actually proposed here is not one that is conducive to developing democratic values. So this is something that teachers need to have the time to have conversations about. They need time in their teacher education, and this needs to be done really, we need to accept the slowness and the time it takes to develop these with teachers. So what we often see is that ministries are interested in developing on these lines, but there are not always the corresponding measures in terms of teacher education to be able to do so. Another important finding in terms of policy recommendations that we found in our project is that most of teacher education is done through lectures. And in order to develop these types of identity formations and really changing and considering our values and how we perceive Europe as one community that can collaborate together, we need to go beyond this. We need to have experiential learning. And very few teacher education programs actually propose experiential learning. We're very much into lectures. And what teachers told us, and when they went to our trainings, which are deeply experiential, with a cycle of challenging teachers so that they can then, through their experience and challenge, go into reflection and perspective taking on what their role is as an educator, is extremely central to the project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pascal. I'm literally listening to you. I was writing down so much, talking about all the kind of different things, the ways of learning, but also the thing that you picked up on there, what exactly are the values that we need to teach people about. And I think that's going to be a really important point, and is actually going to be one of the questions I will ask you. So we will come back to that a little bit later. But now to Jan Eckhorn, Senior Lecturer in Social Policy at the University of Edinburgh. Please do take the floor for a few minutes.
Thank you very much for having me on this exciting discussion, together with colleagues at the University of Edinburgh, but also the think tank Depart in Berlin that I work with. I focus on working how we can use good empirical research to enhance political engagement, in particular of younger people. And the question of whether civic education method has been answered empirically very clearly, it really, really does. We see that civic education can have incredibly good positive outcomes, both for young people's electoral engagement, their non-electoral engagement with politics as well. So the sort of civic engagement that we often really, really hope to see as an outcome. And when I talk about that sort of civic education, it's the one in schools and the one outside schools, as one of the previous speakers has mentioned already. However, what is really crucial, and that chimes with some of the things the previous speaker mentioned, the way civic education is structured and delivered really, really matters. One of the most important things we see is for it to have positive civic payoffs is that it needs to be deliberative. And that means that it needs to be based on young people being enabled to genuinely discuss real issues. We earlier heard the word information. It's not enough to inform about issues. It's also not enough to inform about political processes, for example. It's really important that the debate can take place, because most young people want to discuss issues, but the real things, like the things that get most of us interested when we think about politics, for example. And that includes controversial issues. So it's really important that we enable young people, who often are very self-critical actually, to not just see things as this is the fact you have to learn, but this is a space in which you can discuss it and maybe really enjoy discussing it. That's when we see positive things. And this needs to be linked to practice in schools as well. It's one good thing to learn about democracy, but the other things, often schools aren't structured democratically. So what comes with it is the ability to practice this. And fundamentally, we don't need to be scared of this. There's often a bit of a worry about the undue influence from teachers on young people. But actually, what we often see, especially when teachers are enabled, they do a great job, but often teachers are really, really worried themselves. So quite a bit of our research has shown that a lot of teachers are really, really careful, or maybe sometimes even a bit too careful in providing civics education, because they're worried of being accused to take a particular line of argument, for example. But it is so crucial that this happens in all schools. So enabling teachers in all schools and all settings to deliver civic education is crucial, because if we don't, it's more likely that civic education is delivered at schools in higher status areas, in richer schools, in wealthier contexts. And if that happens, what we see is actually an increase of inequality in political participation by social class. So civic education is really, really crucial, and it can help us overcome some of those inequalities in political engagement, but only if it's delivered comprehensively across all contexts.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Eckhorn. I think, talking about that potential blame game for teachers could be interesting. But let's now open up the discussion then. And just a quick reminder, of course, to everyone who is joining us online, whatever you're hearing, or, all the panelist statements so far, there's been a lot of content, a lot of great ideas, or perhaps you weren't really on board with some of the things that they are saying. Perhaps you're even a concerned parent who doesn't want to have, some of this civic education, as you perhaps heard from Mr. Eckhorn. get involved, send us your comments and your questions, and let us know which panelist you want to direct your questions to. Okay, so with that, then, an icebreaker for all of you. I wanted to ask, we are, of course, living, all of you have discussed, what could be done, what should be done, but we are living in a more polarized society, politically divided society. So has democracy or politics lost its role? Stefan Zotti asked, I'll start with you first, because you also talked about this idea of active citizenship. So has all of this gotten lost?
Well, I'm not sure it got lost. I think, and this is what we see when discussing with academia, when we heard at the very beginning a great project which is funded by the Chamonix program. So I think it's not a question if democracy or the interest of education in democracy is lost. It's just to see how we can be even more efficient, how we can be better in order to avoid, as Jan just talked about, inequalities in democratic participation. And this is what we very much count on the member states as well. Let's not forget that on the European level, education and the design of curricula and also in a certain way the design of teacher education and training is first and primarily in member states' hands. And I think we should not also limit our discussion on European citizenship education as such, but on civic education very much in general, which has many aspects and dimension as well. I think, however, that especially on the European level, especially after the terrorist attacks in Paris 2015-16, with council recommendations in 2018, there is a growing interest and a growing feeling among the member states that we also need very much to cooperate on this field together. In 2018, there were, I think, 2 council recommendations on key competences in lifelong learning, where the fostering, where the development of citizenship competences was explicitly mentioned, and another recommendation on promoting common values, inclusive education, and the European dimension of teaching, where the member states also committed to promote a European dimension in teaching. So I think many things are ongoing. Nevertheless, we have to state a very different level of development between member states. And this is where we, as European Commission, would also see our responsibility in a certain way to facilitate the implementation of these plans, to support member states through exchange, through peer learning, but also through particular funding mechanisms, as, for example, Chamonix for School or Erasmus in general, where there are many projects under Key Action 2, Key Action 3, as the one referred to at the very beginning, who actually are dealing with civic education, European civic education. So I wouldn't be too pessimistic on this, without ignoring that it's still quite a way to go until we can be sure that civic education really got a reality in European schools, universities, lifelong learning institutions.
Okay, well then over to MEP Negrescu then. They're from the Commission and they want to facilitate this. But Mr. Negrescu, do your constituents, are you aware if they actually want to have this civic education?
I'm aware of the fact that they want to learn more about the European Union. They want to learn more about the opportunities. They want to find out how they can influence things, how they can participate at European level, to find out what the European Union is deciding for them and to which extent as well. Because also in the same time, to be very frank, people hear about the European Union in the news, and they hear about that more and more, especially in current times with the pandemic, but also with the war in Ukraine. So they understand that there is a new dimension that goes over, the local interest, the national interest, which is the European perspective and also the global perspective. So if they want to be aware of all of that, but also to a certain extent, like I said, have a certain ownership of what is happening in that new dimension, which is European dimension. And citizenship education is not like, extremists are presenting it. It's not about, doing the propaganda of the European Union. No, not at all. It's about increasing the level of information about the European Union and giving citizens the power to act at European level, because this is unfortunately not happening right now. And this is why they perceive the European Union as being too bureaucratic, because they don't know how they can participate. Everything seems too far away, despite the fact that there are mechanisms for them to participate by simply clicking on a couple of websites. They can participate to the different, let's say, consultations done on your legislation. And also sometimes they hear in the news that, Brussels is deciding things for them, and they don't know that at the level of the institution, it is the council, which are actually the member states, that can always block everything. So no one is deciding for member states without consulting member states. So this is why it is important to do that. Of course, I think what is also interesting to underline, and this has been mentioned by the other speakers as well, this is not about giving lectures about the European Union. It's about involving, citizens in the process. Discuss with them different issues, but also support them in what they want to find out about the European Union, because some might be more interested in finding out what the EU is doing on digital policies. Others might be interested in learning what the EU is doing on agricultural policies. Other people might be interested in the history. But there are so many dimensions that is very important, again, to be aware of all of that.
Sure. Just to follow up, though, there's lots of things that you point out, what this new sort of curricula could do for education. But are you saying that education has so far failed European citizens to keep them informed?
I can actually say that we fail to have a European dimension in education. And this is also related to the fact that in the EU treaties, the EU doesn't have competencies in the field of education. And interestingly enough, during the pandemic, everyone was waiting for the European Union, for instance, to fix the gaps or come up with method that can support teachers to deal with digital education. So, yeah, there are high expectations in the European Union, but we didn't have this European dimension. This is why I mentioned earlier in the Conference for the Future of Europe, this has been widely underlined by citizens that they need to see the European Union doing more on those aspects, and we need the European dimension on that. And we have a couple of things that we are doing. So the European universities is an interesting initiative. We have these teachers' academies for teachers at European level, where we bring competencies and know-how together. And we have Jean Monnet, research institutes and different platforms that are doing very interesting things. But we need to give them more visibility, but also use the content that they produced, because this has been underlined. They did so many things, but we are not using that. So every year we are repeating the same thing all over, but we need something more consistent, and for that we need an European approach on education.
Okay, Tatiana Babruskina, your thoughts then? Should the EU have competence in education?
Yes, but actually I would try to maybe think about the next step. And the next step would be how to link education to real life. And I want to particularly welcome the European Commission's initiative on the use test, because use test, it's a new initiative. It's now under consultation process. And in the European Economic and Social Committee, we have a study group. I'm not rapporteur, but I'm a study group member. And the use tests is about setting a framework for a meaningful involvement of young people into policy making level. This is really, really a very strong step forward. It's the young people are not only approving what is decided at European level or informed about what is done at European level. They are really involved into decision-making level. So they are at the very first step. And I hope that the next step will be also meaningful involvement of young people into implementation level, because this is where we're really stuck with many initiatives, brilliant initiatives coming from the European Union. So I want really education to become more lively and more linked to reality.
Okay, so education linked to reality. Pascal Monpoint-Gallet, your company, Learn to Change, says learning to change is complex and creating lasting, meaningful change is a challenge. Now, earlier you were speaking about, the types of learning that should take place, and you also spoke about values and the fact that we don't really define what these EU values are. So just quickly, your thoughts on this initiative by Teachers for Europe. And also a question, does it go beyond the boundaries of informed learning, or does it really help craft a better relationship for the EU with its citizens?
That's a very long question. I'm going to take it bit by bit. We don't specify what the values are very often. We think that we agree when we say democracy, but for different people it means different things. And I can give you a list of some of the values that teachers gave us back when we asked them, for you, what are these values? And they said democracy, respect, inclusion, equality, and diversity, for example. And in our political debate, already these words are controversial. So when you're thinking about an education that considers values, it is already a controversial education undertaking. So when we're looking at values, it is a question of negotiation of meaning, negotiation of where we want to go as a society. And so I was listening to one of your panelists. Yes, it is important to, for example, create learning conditions where young people can, and I heard the word debate. Now, this negotiation around these issues and these values, I think, deserves rather a conversation. Because what I differentiate, for example, is the learning how to be in conversation with the other is different than debate, in that we accept more to be in a both-and state of mind. We can accept nuance. We have a more systemic view, looking at the relationships between the parts instead of opposing different parts and opinions. It is a process-oriented rather than outcome-oriented. In a debate, we argue to be right. In a conversation, a led conversation, a learning conversation, we can actually focus more on how is it that we are listening to each other and how we are presencing to the issues at hand. So I studied a PhD. I just finished my PhD last year, and looking at what types of conversation in education were conducive to that. And it is very specific types of pedagogies that can lead to that. Also, in order to be an active citizen, I need to be motivated to engage. This question of engagement is extremely important, and this is where the link with non-formal education and opening formal education to non-formal institutions and to non-formal ways of learning is very important. So when we're thinking, for example, we had some teachers tell us we need curricular inclusion of the topic. And journalists, for example, were wondering why there is not at least 1 hour per year on teaching about the European institutions. Already this would be very helpful. And beyond curriculum inclusion, we need to have different types of interdisciplinary approaches and team teaching in order to really address this. And this is where we're challenged, because there is actually very little salaried time that can be spent in teachers working together in order to create these learning ecologies for their students. It's a very complex issue, and what I would like to really insist on is that it pushes us to see this question of education, of European identity, in a very systemic way. There's so many different aspects that we need to develop together in order to really reach the aim of helping our youth to make sense of what it is to be in this world, what it is to be a global citizen, and what it is to be a European citizen.
Well, I think for if my young children sort of listening to that, that sounds like a beautiful education and value.
Yeah.
What the European Commission says.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Stefan Zolti, if I ask you what your top 3 EU values are, what are they to you?
Democracy, freedom, rule of law, human rights, tolerance. I think there is a broad variety and of values we can easily agree with, and which are not really contested. Nevertheless,
to then define what values are.
Pardon, I could not really.
Lost in communication.
I have a bit problems understanding you, but maybe Jan wants to come in on this.
Sure, Jan. Let me ask you then, Jan, if you can hear me. So we're talking about obviously EU values, and looking at the proposal from Teachers for Europe, they talk about values, but they don't actually define them. So what would be your sort of takeaway in terms of what should be included as EU values?
So I think what's important, there are a bit like Stefan just started, there are some things that at kind of high level, a lot of people agree on. There are certain, or most people would agree on as well, conceptions of democracy, for example. The problem is that, as others have mentioned as well, this is interpreted in different ways, in different contexts. For some people, those things, values actually relate very much to what comes out of a process, whereas for others, it is this more founding principle. And really importantly, when we think about education that addresses values, what we need to avoid is a situation where in the end there's basically a test of have you now achieved all those values perfectly in the way that maybe everyone thinks they should be understood at, who's around the table, kind of virtual table like this. Because what we do often see, especially when we compare different countries, so I've worked on a big project where we compared European values across different countries. What we see is that a lot of people agree to a lot of the things that in the treaties is the famous Article 2 values and so on. There's a lot of agreement around this. But what's surprising is that we then also find for some people who agree with those, that they also agree and share value principles that at face value contradict those, who on the one hand embrace open society values, but also look at things that are homogenizing at the same time. So we need to be careful, because if we then basically say your value profile is contradictory, so therefore we reject it and don't engage, that can be a problem when we go into this. So I agree with Pascal there as well on the point that it's about it's not debate, it's about the ability to talk to each other, even if you don't fully agree, trying to find also common points. But we do need to allow it to also enter into discussions about things where people are further apart. I think that's really, really crucial if we don't want to fall into a trap of potentially rejecting, especially some young people from the debate.
So let me quickly ask you a quick follow-up question. Would teachers, I mean, and this is, I mean, I even know the answer as soon as I even ask it, but would teachers then need to be sort of pro-European if they're going to be teaching all of these values? Because in order to teach these values, it has to be believable. But you can't obviously ensure that every single teacher is pro-European. So then how then do you create this sort of foundation that teachers that can take it forward?
I think that's a really important point. There's a difference between pro-European as in pro-EU and sharing some of those fundamental values like democracy, tolerance, some of those points. It would be really counterproductive to have, for example, civic education at which the outcome is students need to now say they love the European Union. If that was the premise, you would actually create a strong counter reaction from a lot of young people. What you want to have is a space in which information can be shared, factual information can be shared, but also discussions can be held about positives, negatives, and the deeper question of those fundamental values. So no, you don't necessarily need to have a teacher who has a glorious view of certain institutions or processes, but they should share certain types of values that are probably also values that are enshrined in the constitutions of their countries. But in terms of teaching, it's really important that for it to be authentic and real, that also the worries and the concerns that young people have can be included in those discussions.
Okay, Stefan Zotti, we'll quickly come back to you because I know that you were having a bit of an issue with sound, so I hope you can hear me. And if you'd like to, just pick up on what you heard Jan talking about there, about values and what we can view in teachers.
Thanks, Miriam. On the one hand side, I think really to underline what Jan just said. I mean, we're talking, and this is, I think, also one of the key values about a liberal society in Europe. So teaching and about values cannot be a sort of we commit in each and every issue to the same understanding. We want to keep this openness as a tolerant society, as a liberal society, and I think that's important. On the other hand side, I just wanted to stress from our understanding also a bit the limits of teaching about values. I think when at the beginning I talked about civic competences as not something only about being informed, but about an attitude. We also very much need to take into account many other ways of learning in your youth organization, in civil society, in settings as the European Solidarity Corps, where you actually experience values as solidarity and many other things in your daily life. And I think this is also very important and needs to be also included under a bit of a broader understanding of learning and teaching, actually. So I think it would be overloading a bit the responsibility of teachers to say in the 1 hour you have per week on civic education in a very ideal world, you also need to make everybody a good, liberal, open, tolerant, democrat, etc., etc. Yeah, I think here we should also be clear about the limits.
Okay, and Pascal, you wanted to jump in there.
Thank you for giving me the floor, and it links very well with what Stefan just said. Actually, everyone has heard about a concept that is the hidden curriculum. So yes, it is important that schools open up to communities, that youth have the opportunity to participate in NGOs and in actions outside of school, but they do spend a lot of time in school. And when school is not organized around democratic processes, when participation of students in decision-making in schools is not present, they're actually learning something about non-democracy or about how this institution is not offering possibilities for them to have the experience of their engagement and living the fact that their engagement produces social results. So this is very important. And also wanting to go back to the idea of the controversies. I would like to, for example, recall the incident of the tragedy, actually, of Samuel Paty, who was a teacher who actually tried to engage with a controversial issue, perhaps with his own ways. I'm not going to comment or judge. But there is an element of risk, and I repeat then, that is very important for teachers to learn how, and also to consider, for example, that past traumas, discriminations, the way that students can themselves have interpretations of their reality and how they may see inequalities and have resentment about these, have to be part of teachers' awareness so that they can engage this type of of learning inside the school context. Just to finish, I think one of the best ways actually of having democratic values enter the school again, which is a place where students spend a lot of time, is to have whole school approaches where the whole community is actually working together to understand what are the processes that need to be in place so that young people today become the active citizens of tomorrow.
Can a community approach work, though? And that goes, I guess, to our MEP, Mr. Negrescu.
I think it's very important, again, to involve the community in the process of learning about the European Union. And like I said earlier, it's not about, let's say, a one-size-fits-all format. It's about how we are looking at the European Union and how we are giving citizens a role in this common framework. So what is important for me at the end is, after this type of education, for the individual to feel comfortable on what he can do, on what are his rights or his obligation at European level, how he can take a leading role. And at the same time, you need interaction with the community. So involving the civil society, involving the parents, for instance, involving the local authorities, involving the private sector or the social partners. So it's very important to have an open format. And why not also for the education process to enable, let's say, pupils, learners to interact with those different partners to learn together how they can take advantage of this European Union. So it's not about being pro-EU. Like I said, it's not propaganda. It's about giving methods for citizens to become more powerful in this structure. And of course, one of the biggest mistakes is to build a top-down approach, because the promoters of citizenship education are actually structures across Europe, very involved at local levels, that are promoting it at European level. So we still need to give them a very active role in how we are framing things at European level. So we need the Commission to take a leading position. The Parliament is pushing for that, but this leading position doesn't mean that those stakeholders should not be taken in consideration. So this is why it's important, again, to involve them in this process. So we need an open platform where all those partners get involved, and when that are participating to the development of the process and how we are doing that across Europe. So this is really important, again, for this to be successful, because otherwise it will not lead to the positive result that we expect from citizenship education.
Yep, no, indeed. Tatiana, you're hearing a lot there. Pascal was there talking about the example of a teacher trying to sort of imbue this kind of learning. We've heard from our MEP who talked about, or reiterated and supported what Pascal was saying about this collective approach. But something that I noticed on your social media, you said that teachers face a formidable challenge in the 21st century. So given all the ideas that we're hearing about right now, does this initiative overburden teachers? I mean, this isn't just about a curricular change. If we look at what teachers are going through right now, they're going through budget cuts, inadequate funding, longer hours, crises, for example, the pandemic, the ways in which they had to then reformulate the way in which they taught students. And they were essentially available 24/7 for their students and for their schools and their places of teaching. Teachers also have to deal with bad salaries. They have to deal with pension cuts. The list is quite endless. The environment, we're asking here, and I hope none of you mind me saying this, we're asking a lot of teachers. So do they have the right tools in place to actually put these practices in place, Tatiana?
Yes, as I said already at the beginning, to put solely responsibility on teachers is not fair because of all the mentioned reasons you had. And also much more. But let's look how young children learn things better, or how, let's say, they perceive things. And they do that from the same as they are, young person to young person. And recently, I'm building now at what Jan has said, we need debates. Recently, we started youth debates on different various very sensitive issues, and including also EU integration issues. And it works. Young people are debating with young people. And of course, there are different views and they listen to each other and they're perceiving this information. They have arguments, they have to prepare. And this works. For example, I can give a very short example. The question was very provocative about a Lithuanian situation during this invasion of Russia to Ukraine. And the question was, what if it was Lithuania attacked by Russia? Would other EU member states go to protect Lithuania? Would they send their soldiers and etc.? And then the auditorium was divided. And then the question, another one, would Lithuanians go to, let's say, defend Portuguese or Greek people, etc. And it was a very interesting debate. And I think that's what we have to encourage, the debate culture and how they can learn. And of course, there are plenty of online tools. I pointed out also in the opinion of the ESC that this is something which we're still missing, especially when we speak about the languages, because in English language, you usually can find in French, but not in the small languages like Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian, or also other languages which have not so big populations. So we have to translate some tools.
Okay, well, let's now go to those audience questions, because I have been told we only have about 15 minutes left. So this chat that we've been having, this debate, has been brilliant so far. Okay, well, let's see what some of you are saying. A question for Jan, and this is definitely something that I also wanted to touch upon. Could education have played a role in the outcome of Brexit?
It's a really important one, but it's actually, if we look at kind of just general education, which is quite low, not just in the UK, it's lower than many other countries in the EU, but it's overall quite low. But actually, there isn't a strong correlation between formal knowledge about EU processes and views about the European Union. It's much more closely linked to actually your level of education in the UK context. So there's a big social inequality dimension, as I've talked about earlier. So education could have mattered, but really the more important thing around Brexit, I would argue, is the mistake of the engagements of the political campaigns. So the campaigns against Brexit in the UK, one campaign didn't engage with the issues that people wanted to talk about, i.e. not just the economy, but also cultural factors. And the other side, mostly focusing on university towns rather than talking with the working class, for example. So I wouldn't so much say it's a failure of education, because also people who voted against Brexit were not particularly well informed necessarily. And this is something we should take overall. We shouldn't fall, I think, sometimes into the trap of thinking everyone who's against the EU, for example, is poorly informed. That is frankly, empirically not always the case. But what we do see is that people hold greater kind of forms of resentment, for example. So what we need to enable is a discussion about where those resentments come from, rather than writing people off, which I think quite often happens. So it's engaging in a way that allows people to talk about those issues, creating for doing this. And young people, just as a final point, are much better at this than older people, because they're actually often less partisan initially. They're more open to accept that there might be rules to the game of having a discussion, actually. And that's why school is a good place for this, because that's what you always are used to in the classroom. There are certain rules for engaging with each other. So it's a really good place to learn how to have these sorts of conversations.
Brilliant. Well, I want to stay along the theme of Brexit and just throw another question out to the panelists. Perhaps, Stefan Zotti, you could take this one. Given that Brexit happened, and given what Jan was saying there, could the role of the media be amplified when we're talking about, imbuing a sense of Europe into education? Where does the media come into this? Because if we're talking about education, if we're talking about the role of institutions in providing, or the executives, all the different various actors and players, where does the media come into?
Well, I think we spent some time discussing today about how to better educate teachers train teachers, we might also spend a second in thinking about how to better educate and train journalists, actually. And as Victor said before, it's not always really clear if you go through the media where the real responsibilities are. What does it mean if a decision was taken in Brussels? There are rather little media, I have the feeling from time to time, who would point to the very fact that there is not a single decision taken without at least the member states. And today, fortunately, in most of the cases, also the European Parliament. So it's not the anonymous bureaucrats somewhere in Brussels taking decisions, but there is a co-responsibility of the member states, of governments, and so on, which, but interestingly enough, is hardly ever mentioned. So I think well-educated media could very much also help to rationalize the discourse and the public debate about the European Union, about the different roles, and to make procedures, responsibilities clearer to the public, and by doing so also help to educate in a certain way the citizens.
Okay, we'll take another question from Josephine Hannay. Pascal, perhaps you could take this one. Josephine says, how to engage... Oh, God, sorry, it just jumped up. Let me go find back. Okay, all the questions keep refreshing, so hold with me 1 second. Okay, well, we've just asked another question. I can't find that question. And one from Paul Lim. He says, the approach should be human values rather than EU values, isn't it? And that's a question to all speakers. And he says that this is more fundamental. Pascal, would you like to go first with that one?
Yes, we came into having to make decisions about this in the beginning of the program because many of our members and community members were asking us why European values. We are all part of a planet, a world, and today we're facing global issues. So the term European values was somehow at times problematic. Now, we dealt with this in two ways, actually. We're focusing a lot on democratic values, or values for democracy, which is a way of globalizing the concept. And then the issue of Europe, and maybe not European values, but some kind of European adhesion. Of course, not blindly, but at least entering into a reflection around what does it mean to be European, and together on this continent, together with common institutions, allowed us to enter the topic of European values. But we do recognize that it is surprising for educators to hear this term, and we had to explain many times why we were dealing this way with the topic.
Okay, MEP Negrescu, I'm going to come to you. I can't quite see the name of the person who's asked this question, but they ask a question about social exclusion. And how then do you include EU citizens that are feeling disenfranchised with the entire EU project?
I think it's very important, again, for this type of system to work, to have an inclusive approach and not stay in, let's say, the European bubble that exists not only in Brussels, but also in different member states. So we need to be transparent and open about it, and accessible in the same time, and democratic also in our approach. So that means, of course, develop methods in which, or that enables us to be present with this type of education in smaller schools, in rural areas. Also develop methods that can be applied for children with disabilities, for instance. And also in the same time, change how we are approaching things based on the level of information that people have on European Union. So this is why we need to have a flexible approach and be capable to offer the possibility for the teacher to adapt. And for that, we need to train teachers, but not just train them because we have to do it, or simply because, we have some target in a European project. We have to train 1,000 teachers. We invite them to some classes and we say, yeah, we had 1,000 teachers. They signed that they participated and that's it. We really need to create communities, and this is what, for instance, the Chadmon Network is managing to do. Communities of teachers willing to engage on these topics, exchange between themselves, develop and adapt and always modernize their approach, and keep the classes interesting and alive, and also to be, like I said earlier, adapted to all kinds of participants, like I said, from all age groups. So this is not easy. This is why the concept of values is important. For me, when we speak about values, it's about how the value of educating or teaching about the European Union. It's not about, a political approach toward the European Union. It's about the need to understand that we need to engage people on these matters that is of great importance for them, and to give them enough, let's say, capacities and capabilities for them, and aptitudes and competencies for them to be active also at European level, because 2/3 of national legislations get influenced by what is being decided in Brussels. So this is why it's important, again, for them to be aware of what is happening there and have the power to act.
Okay, well, if they're influenced by Brussels, then Stefan Zotti, does the Conference on the Future of Europe perhaps act as a kind of indicator for the European Union to really accept its role in shaping values, but also their need to change their approach, to be more transparent, to communicate better with their citizens, to talk to younger generations on their level? And before you answer, I'll just give you an example of a meme I saw. It is quite funny, so I hope you don't mind it. It was basically two birds. One represented the EU, one represents the citizen. The EU bird is desperately flapping its wings at the citizen. It keeps going and it keeps going. The citizen sort of, standing back, and then eventually the citizen flies off. And I thought that sometimes, in a very sort of simple way, does say something quite serious, in that sometimes citizens don't feel that they have this closeness to the EU.
Well, yes, I would agree, actually. And I think this is an experience we as Commission share with the Parliament, the Committee of the Region, the Social and Economic Committee, and others. I think we are doing very much in terms of communication. We are offering information. But obviously we need to start communicating differently, maybe in a different language. And this also goes with regard to many of the teaching materials and information we provide, for example, for schools. I usually tell teachers, but also colleagues here within the European Commission, that we actually need to talk different about Europe. I mean, so many information about Europe immediately starts with institutions and how co-decision works and so on, which is not the way one of us would ever talk about his hometown or the country. Yeah, if I'm up for a party and asked, I'm from Vienna, tell me about Vienna, it's normally not the way to say, well, we have the committee here and the mayor there, and that's the competences. And no, you talk about history, culture, and many other things. And I think this is the way we need to start talking about Europe as well. And this might make it easier to understand and to digest, I hope.
Okay, well, listen, thank you all. What I will do is let you all just quickly wrap up your final thoughts, because we literally have about 2 minutes left. So, MEP Negrescu, if you could go first, please.
I think we live very interesting moments right now, and the war in Ukraine is pushing us to advance on many issues, among which citizenship, education, and make sure citizens are aware of the important role of the European Union. Ukraine is not in the European Union. They are not protected. We are in the European Union, and unfortunately, not enough of us really cherish this structure that we have together. So when we speak about the European Union, we speak about what brought us together and what can move us forward together in a very constructive way. So we need to give citizens ownership, and citizenship education is an excellent method to do so.
Okay, thank you so much. Stefan Zotti, over to you quickly.
As I just said, I think we all agree that active citizenship is important to make this Europe even more a project of its citizens, even more democratic, etc. This has impact on how we talk, but also how we teach about Europe. We are on quite a good way, but this needs common efforts and more ambition.
Okay, Tatiana, next.
I'm deeply convinced, as a representative of civil society, that we need EU-level channel, strong media channel. We need something much stronger than Euronews. We need that kind of TV or also maybe linked newspapers. We are missing that, and we are losing a lot. So I plea, let's think about, let's invest into this kind of TV channel and different media EU level.
Right. Well, the criticism on Euronews, I'm not sure if you're aware of my link to Euronews, so I won't comment further, but perhaps Euronews could think about having a children's European channel. Okay, so next we'll go to Pascal. And Pascal, honestly, your interventions and what you've been saying have been brilliant, so please do take the floor.
Thank you. I choose to emphasize community. The language we employ to talk about Europe is important, and we need inclusive conversations in close communities to be able to adopt certain critical values together, including Europeans of all backgrounds, including those who are here because of the colonization past of Europe, for example. And we spoke about resentments. I think we have to engage in conversations that address all sorts of things, including resentments. Community. Let's be in community and in conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think those uncomfortable conversations are something that are hugely important. Unfortunately, we didn't get to talk about decolonization or colonization. And then just lastly, Jan, can I take the floor?
Just briefly, I think one thing that's incredibly important in all of this is that we enable conversations in civic education with young people that allow young people to be diverse and heterogeneous in the points that they want to make. We often talk about young people as if they're one group, but they're as diverse in their views, attitudes, and in how they engage with values as the rest of the population. And I think it's really important for this to be effective that we enable young people to talk about all of these different perceptions and perspectives that they have when we design approaches for civic education for them.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, well, we will leave it there. But MEP Victor Negrescu, Stefan Zotti, Tatiana Babros-Skin, Pascal Montpellier, and Jean Eckhorn. Thank you all so much for being part of a very lively, thoughtful discussion. And of course, to everyone who has been watching online, I really hope that what you have seen has given you a flavor of the debate around democracy and the role of education. I'm Mariam Zadi, and you've been watching a Euractiv debate supported by Teachers for Europe. Take care and bye-bye.